Hey, it's Matt, your average gamer, and as the title suggests, this is going to be all strength builds, basically strength or strength faith builds in general. Mainly, the main stat will be strength, obviously, and they're going to be high bonk builds, meaning we're going to hit stuff really hard with these. It should be a lot of fun. Let's get into the details. So I realized something a while back when I did a whole bunch of different builds and lists on individual stats. I never gave much love to strength in that list category, and it was something really missing, so I wanted to go back and give you the best bonk builds that are still really powerful on 1.09 that do insane levels of damage and make the game a lot easier. They're also very insanely buffable and have high damage caps. First one is Guts, Greatsword, and Lion's Call. A great combination that's really powerful. Let's get into equipment. So for equipment, we have the Guts Greatsword plus 25, any seal will do. We have the Raptor's Black Feathers on to boost some jump attacks, Axe Talisman, Ritual Swords Talisman, we have the Shard of Alexander, then we have the Green Turtle Talisman, and then for the tier, you can do something like the Charge tier and then the Faith tier for additional buffs as well. That way you can use Golden Vow or any additional buffs you want to do, because Lion's Claw has a good damage cap, so it's definitely something you're going to want to add some buffs to. This is a really hard-hitting Ash of War on the Guts Greatsword. Let's get into stats. So for stats, no surprise here, we're heavily invested in strength. You're going to see a theme here. There's a couple strength faith builds, but mainly speaking, strength's going to be our main stat, so you're going to invest as much as you possibly can in strength, so you can make the most use out of Lion's Claw, which we're using either in the heavy affinity or fire affinity. You can use fire affinity for those pesky tree avatars that absolutely destroys them, and heavy affinity for any other bosses. Next up here is a really fun one. That's the one-hit Giants Crusher build. It's a fantastic build for taking down bosses in a single strike. This is a really powerful one and it involves a lot of buffs. One of the reasons why I did this list, by the way, is because right now on patch 1.09, until they fix it, and I think it was unintended, buffs aren't working that well for incantations, supposedly. Tried it myself, had the same issues, so this is one of those things, and there's going to be another build in here where I'll talk about that as well, which is a great alternative, because this you can still buff like crazy, and you can one-hit a whole bunch of bosses in the game and do massive damage. This is the bonk build. This is going to be the one that runs up and just hits stuff in a single hit and takes them out. It's a lot of fun to do. It really works well, especially on the early journeys. Later journeys, bosses maybe 2 or 3 hits, but even so. The buffing system, by the way, is in the video below. All the videos in the description. Let's get into equipment. For equipment, we have the Giants Crusher plus 25, the Seppuku Sword to bring your HP down, any seal will do, and then we had the Mushroom Crown of Black Dumpling, Axe Talisman, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Red Feathered Brand Sword for that low health proc, Kindred of Rot's Exaltation, and then the Charge tier, and then you can throw in the Fire tier. Blood Boil is also really good with this too. Now let's get into the next one, Marika's Hammer, really powerful, even better now on patch 1.09. If you're wondering why no stats for the Giants Crusher, it's pretty straightforward. It's all strength as far as that goes. As much strength as possible. Everything else is up to you. Now for Marika's Hammer, let's talk about this. I was able to test this on one of my characters and had a few people give me feedback as well. The Ash of War can be spammed even a little bit more now because the recovery is better, and attacking out of the animation, the end animation for the Ash of War, is something that you can do quicker now, much like Starscourge Greatsword, which obviously made the list as well. This is one that you can now spam and attack out of faster since they increased the recovery time after using the Ash of War. And this is one that's going to be really good now for the majority of bosses in the game. Aside from bosses that have 80% holy resistance, this is a really powerful one, especially since it's split damage. Its main damage stat is strength, and then obviously a secondary and holy. This is the definition of a bonk build given the slam down. Does a lot of damage, highly buffable too. Let's get into equipment. And obviously the holy comes from the faith stat, and that is secondary. Marika's Hammer plus 10, any seal will do. We're using the Black Dumpling and Mushroom Crown to boost this because it is highly buffable. Dragon Crest, Shard of Alexander, Ritual Swords Talisman, Sacred Scorpion Charm to boost the holy damage, and then the holy tier as well. Let's get into stats. I did this on a glass cannon character, so I only had 40 vigor, but I'd recommend at least 50 vigor and then go for 50 strength and then around 40 faith, and you should get really good and comparable damage out of it. You're going to end up with really good damage in general because the Ash of War now is more spammable, high damage, good amount of physical damage. It does a little bit of posture damage too. It's a very powerful Ash of War, especially on 1.09. Next up, and since Strength is the first stat and Arcane is the second one, Marais Executioner Sword, one of my favorite weapons. It was my first build video that I ever did on my channel, actually was for Marais back in May of last year. I love this weapon, let's talk about it. It's insanely buffable and really powerful. With patch 1.09 affecting incantations, and again, when you're seeing this video, it may have been fixed by now. It may be fixed at any time. I believe it was unintended still. I think they're going to fix it. But in the meantime, if you're looking for something to one-shot stuff, you're going to go with the one-hit Giants Crusher build. Marais Executioner is also a good alternative where you can do a lot of damage, really buff this weapon up, and absolutely shred boss HP. There's never a better time to use Marais Executioner Sword. It's really powerful, very powerful Ash of War, very powerful weapon in general. This is something that's a lot of fun to use. I've been using this basically since launch. It's so much fun to use this weapon with the build-up on successive attacks and how buffable it is. It's high damage, and it can one-shot a lot of the bosses in the game. Let's get into equipment. For equipment, we have Marais Executioner plus 10. Any seal will do. We have the Black Dumpling and Mushroom Crown if you want to buff this. I'll talk about that in a minute. Rotten Wing Sword Insignia. Godfrey Icon. Boost this one as charged. Kindred of Rot's Exaltation. Shard of Alexander. Then you can have the Magic tier and the Thorny tier for more damage as well. Let's get into stats. For stats here, your main stat's going to be Strength and secondary Arcane. So much like the Marika's Hammer split where it was 50 Strength and 50 Faith, we're going to go with 50 Strength and around 40 Arcane at least to get really good damage out of the Ash of War and to make use of a very powerful weapon. It's definitely the time to try this one too, so give it a try. Something really fun that you're going to want to do if you're a Strength build. This is a very, very fun weapon to use that does a lot of damage. Extremely good weapon. Let's get on to the next one, which is Starscourge Greatswords, which also saw a buff. I covered it in my last video. There's never a better time to use this one. On 1.09 as well. And the Starscourge Greatsword buff essentially is after the Ash of War, much like Marika's Hammer, you can now follow up attack much faster. Your attacks out of the Ash of War are quicker, which in the end gives you more damage and makes it a more powerful build. There's never a better time to use the Starscourge Greatswords because for the weight, you're essentially getting 2 Greatswords for the weight of 1 while getting a good amount of damage, and then the Ash of War itself is quite good as well too, especially for your first couple new game cycles. This is definitely one of those builds to work towards because it's incredibly powerful. The Starscourge Greatswords are fantastic on 1.09. This was obviously an intended buff, much like Marika's Hammer, so this is going to be something that sticks around for a while too. If you like the Starscourge Greatswords, then the last patch was definitely good news for you because they're investing in these weapons in the long term. Same with Marika's Hammer, and for DLC, they're going to be really powerful weapons. Let's get into equipment. For equipment, we have the Starscourge Greatswords plus 10. Any seal will do. We have the Highland Axe for the passive, the Raptor's Black Feathers on. We have the Roar Medallion. We have the Shard of Alexander, Ritual Swords Talisman. We have Dragon Crest, preferably the Great Shield. You could throw in something like the Magic tier and then the Faith tier for buffs as well. And that's a really powerful one. Let's get into the stats for this one. This one's a little bit more specific, but it's nothing too crazy. All right, let's go over stats. For stats, you want to heavily invest in strength, and then you want to meet that minimum requirement of 15 or 20 intelligence, whatever the minimum requirement is, because you're not going to get too much damage out of the intelligence stat. The main slam down, the highest damage portion, plus the weapons themselves are going to scale mainly with strength. So get your strength up as high as you can. You're going to get a lot of damage out of these. Definitely with the bonk, they get that award too, because with the slam down, it's definitely a bonk build. Let's get into the next one, which is the Royal Greatsword build. I had 5 originally, but I threw in this one because I feel like it's underrated, but this is a really fun one that basically is Lion's Claw with frost damage. This Battle Mage setup isn't necessary, but it is really fun to use, especially since the weapon, again, is mainly strength with the secondary in intelligence, so you can use something like the Fingerprint Shield and Scholar Shield. Even on recent patches after the nerfs to the Fingerprint Shield, you'll still block the majority of attacks, and you can follow up with an awesome Ash of War that does frost damage as well. It's a high damage Ash of War because it's very much like Lion's Claw, and because the Royal Greatsword naturally has really good AR on it. It's a high damage weapon in general, and just hits with it, specifically just randomly hitting it for the charged attack, for instance. If you're going to be specific about the damage, it's probably over 1,000. It's a lot. It's something that's really hard hitting, and then you throw in that Ash of War, get the frost damage as well. Wish it had innate frost on it that'd make it even better. Unfortunately, it does not. However, it's still a very powerful weapon. Let's get into equipment. For equipment, we have the Royal Greatsword plus 10. We have the Demi-Human Staff. We have the Fingerprint Shield with Scholar Shield on it. Any seal will do. We have the Spellblade set on because it will boost this because it's a Magic Ash of War. Shard of Alexander. Ritual Swords Talisman. We have the Great Jar's Arsenal because we're holding a lot of weight here. And then we have Dragon Crest Great Shield. And you use something like the Magic tier and the Faith tier for buffs to get those extra buffs in to get even more damage out of it. Let's get into stats. For stats, it's going to be a lot like the Starscourge setup where you're going to go heavily in strength and then the minimum in intelligence. Now, this will scale a little bit better with the intelligence stat. I think you get more damage out of it on hits and whatnot. But generally speaking, your main stat, again, a theme with this entire video, is strength, and you're going to get a lot of damage out of the Ash of War. Once again, all the builds are in the description below, so be sure to check all those out. I'm going to make sure that I timestamp them for this video as well to make sure everything's like complete this time, because I know sometimes I forget the timestamps, so I will remember this time. And as far as the Discord in the description below, over 350 people now. Definitely got to join that. It's incredibly active. My plan is to make it one of the best Elden Ring communities there is by the time DLC comes. It is my goal just for fun, so let's keep adding on to that. Join the Discord, and of course, if you're not subbed, definitely be sure to sub to this channel as well. If you love overpowered PvE builds, we've been covering a ton lately. There's a ton of builds on my channel, so be sure to check out all the awesome content there. Thanks for watching, and as always, I will catch you guys there.